try this again. We're going to start with the first few verses of John 6, not verse 3, but this passage. So Jesus then said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day." He's talking about believers. He won't lose any believers. "For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day." So we talked about the characteristics of the true bread. It's Jesus, and he is a person. He gives life. He satisfies, and he's not talking about real bread that we eat. He's talking about being satisfied eternally and satisfied in our relationship with Christ. That we will be. We will have all that we need to follow him. So Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." Spiritually, you're going to be hungry. You're going to be thirsty at some point physically, but we're talking spiritually. And then we talked about bread, and that is really very important. A necessity. Food is needed daily. It must be processed to be eaten, and that doesn't really even make sense. And then the rejection of the true bread. Jesus was rejected by many people. And even to this day, more people reject Jesus than believe in Jesus. And that was true in his day, and it's still true today. And especially the Jewish leadership was anti-Jesus, didn't believe in Jesus. He said things that made him angry, got their dander up, I guess is the way of saying. So Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me," obviously God. "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me." He's talking about believers. "And for this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day." So the Jews rejected Jesus, and we talked about that, and why they rejected Jesus was because they were partly their sinful condition, and that they are not drawn to the Father, but they also believed he was apostate. They believed that he was a false teacher because he was teaching things other than what they were teaching. And they thought they were the only true teachers in Israel. So this guy who's just shown up can't be a true rabbi, can't be the true Messiah. And so they didn't believe in him. And so we move on to this. Jesus answered them, "Do not grumble among yourselves," seeing exactly what they were thinking and also saying. So No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they will all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. He's talking about himself. So what he's saying is that in any person who comes to Christ, God has drawn that person. God has laid that on that person's heart. Nobody comes to Jesus unless they have been drawn by God to him. And that's still true today. So the impact of the living bread. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven so that one may eat of it and not die. So again, we're talking die spiritually, okay? So everybody will die except for those who are here when Jesus comes back. But what they're saying is that what Jesus is saying is that the manna only satisfied for a time. It didn't keep them alive forever. What Jesus has done for us will not help, is the cause of us being to live forever in heaven. Apart from that, we can't. Only because of what Jesus has done can we live forever in heaven. And so that's why it says, so that one may eat of it and not die. It's not talking about real manna, it's talking about what Jesus has done and who Jesus is. Excuse me. So the broken bread. So this is a little bit longer. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. That's weird. The Jews then disputed among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in you. So at this point now, talking about cannibalism, but we're not. That's not what he's talking about. Every time you take communion, you understand this, right? We're participating in what Jesus is talking about. And he is saying that if you don't have my life in you, you don't have life. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks on my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever feeds on me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not that the bread that the fathers ate, the manna, and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Jesus said these things in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. So, what he's saying is what we commemorate when we do communion. We talk about his broken body for us, his body broken for us, his blood shed for us. And that's what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about communion because it was, or the word supper, because it hadn't happened yet. But he's telling these people the only way to get to heaven, the only way to know God is through Him and His sacrifice. That's what He means. I know it sounds weird, what He's saying, but that is what He is talking about. So so He is the broken bread. And I want you to imagine, I'm going to read this, but I want you to imagine the reaction of the crowd at this point, because it is, it is, oh, wait, so, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. I know I read this. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews disputed among themselves, saying, how can this man give his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and you drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever feeds on me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like the bread that the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Jesus said these things in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. So I'm sure that people were like, what is going on here? And so we have to understand what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about his crucifixion. And that he would give his life so that we might have life. His death would give us life. So that's what he's talking about, that the only way we can be saved is by the atonement that Jesus made for us. Jesus died for us so we wouldn't have to. And we saw this too in the feeding of the 5,000, that he broke the bread, right, and gave it. Where else do we see that in the New Testament? That he broke the bread and gave it. At the Last Supper, the night before he was crucified. And so all of this is lining up with that substitutionary death that Jesus gave for us. The only way we can be made whole is through his death and his resurrection. And without that, and our faith in that, there is no salvation. Paul says there is salvation in no one else. There is no other name under heaven by which we must be saved. So if we don't take that deal, there's no deal to have. So he's talking about giving his life for the world, for those who would know him. And we talk about Jesus being broken on the cross, right? And so that breaking of the bread was the breaking of his body. So those physical loaves were a symbol of Jesus's physical brokenness. So let's talk about some. Let's talk about some of the results. By and large, the people forsake him. They walk away. Some don't, but most did, because, frankly, it is weird. It's hard to understand. It is hard teaching. And so most people rejected it. Uh, and they wanted maybe to believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but they just couldn't reconcile that statement that he would have to die. And to die on a cross for a Jew would be unthinkable because that was the most humiliating death you could have. So that would, to any Jew today, any Jew ever, that doesn't make any sense. That's for the worst of the worst. And Jesus made himself sin so that we could be made whole. Um, and um, and so he could reconcile us to himself. And even Jesus said, "This is a hard saying." You know, I think it was who said that was the disciples, but it is. It's a hard saying. It's hard to swallow. We would say. Um, so I don't know what exactly the disciples were thinking about. I don't think they thought it was foolish, but I think they didn't understand what Jesus meant. And I don't know that they could have. Um, and he says in verse 61, does this offend you? And it probably did. And it was probably pretty silent with the disciples because they couldn't understand a dying Messiah. Messiah was to conquer. Messiah was to come to conquer. And he did. He conquered sin and death. And someday he will come back again to conquer everything. But they didn't understand that at the time. So a lot of people forsake him and grumble about him. But the 12 stay with him. And when Jesus asked them, "Do you want to reject me too?" Peter came back with these words that, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. There's no other way. There's no other person." And so they stay with Jesus. So there's one last little bit here, but because I stopped here with the other class, I'm going to stop here too. We'll finish this little bit up tomorrow, and then you'll take your quizzes, and we might even start chapter 18. Okay? That's it for today. That's